I counted the lights. There were 11 of them in cell block C, 11 recess panels in the ceiling, each one behind a scratch-resistant polymer cover that had yellowed since installation. I know they had yellowed because the quality of light they produced was not white. It was the color of old paper or of teeth. It never changed. There was no window. I did not know for the first 9 days whether it was morning or evening outside the facility. I knew only that the lights came on at a certain hour and dimmed slightly, not completely, at another. I counted the lights because it was something to count. I am the kind of person who needs to count something. 41 days. I was in compact detention processing Hub Kethorval 7 for 41 days before the night we left. My name is Velsorn Keithai. I was, at the time of my detention, the third-line heir of the Vreth house, which is not a great house. It is not a house anyone outside the Velsorn sovereignty would know by name. It is the kind of house that pays its assessments on time and keeps its members out of official records, which is how a family survives 300 years of compact expansion without being absorbed or erased. We were quiet people. I was a quiet person. I had a survey certification, grade 2, seismic and atmospheric specialization, and I had been 2 weeks from the end of a joint survey posting on Threscale 5 when the processing team arrived at the outpost and told me there was a discrepancy in my house registration. I still do not fully understand the discrepancy. The intake documentation I was given used a legal category I had never encountered in 12 years of compact survey work. The facility's intake officer, a small, efficient woman who did not make eye contact, processed me in 40 minutes and assigned me to cell block C, holding position 14, pending registry review. The registry review, as far as I could determine, had not been assigned to anyone. The cell was 4 meters by 3. The ceiling was approximately 2.5 meters high, which I measured by standing and extending one arm fully overhead, adding the known length of my arm to my standing height, and noting that my fingertips did not reach. The floor was smooth poured composite, which absorbed cold from the climate management system and held it consistently. The cold was most pronounced near the northeast corner, which I determined was below the main refrigerant conduit line. The sleeping platform ran along the left wall, a fixed installation in the same composite as the floor, with a foam layer on top that had been compressed by previous occupants to a depth I estimated at 43% of its original specification. There was a sanitation unit in the northeast corner, the food slot centered in the door, and the observation mesh, a narrow horizontal strip at approximately 160 centimeters from the floor. I know precisely because I am 158 centimeters tall, and standing at the door I could see through it at approximately eye level. I counted everything. This is how I know that the food slot operated on a 162-minute cycle during the facility's active hours, and a 240-minute cycle during what I estimated was the night period. I know that the footsteps of the 3 workers who delivered food trays during their respective shifts had distinct timing patterns. The first was quick and consistent, the second slightly uneven in the right foot, suggesting an old injury or a compensated stress fracture at the lateral ankle. The third moved slowly and took long pauses that I could not initially explain, until I calculated that the pauses aligned spatially with the location of a ventilation intake at the midpoint of Block C's main corridor, and concluded that the third worker stood in the current of warmer air for several seconds each time they passed it. I counted because it was something to do with my mind. My mind is not well suited to doing nothing. It generates observations and categorizes them and builds models from the categories, and if I did not give it material to work with, it would begin working on things I did not want it to work on. The registry review that had not been assigned to anyone. My house's 300 years of careful invisibility, and what it meant that the compact had found a category to put us in. Whether my survey posting supervisor at Threscale 5 had been notified, and if so, what he had been told. Whether the intake officer who had processed me in 40 minutes without meeting my eyes had understood that I was not a logistics entry or had simply not cared. And so, 48 ceiling tiles. An offset one in the northeast corner, where the installation team had cut the tile to accommodate a conduit junction not present on the original schematics. 11 light panels. 42 seconds from the outer corridor door to the food slot during the first worker's shift, 37 during the second, 63 during the third. The foam platform compressed by approximately 12 millimeters more on the right side than the left, suggesting that the previous occupant or occupants slept predominantly on the right. The particular frequency of the climate management system's primary compressor cycle, which I could hear through the right wall as a low vibration that peaked every 4 minutes and 11 seconds. I had the vibration timing memorized by day 4. By day 6, I could estimate the time of day to within approximately 12 minutes based on the vibration count since the food slot's last cycle. It was not a useful skill. I developed it anyway, because it was there to develop, and the alternative was to sit in the center of the cell and think about the things I was trying not to think about. Oren Tail was different from the first day I saw him. He came through on a maintenance cycle, which I learned was 3 times daily, morning, midday, late evening. He carried a diagnostic case on a shoulder strap and walked the corridor with the unhurried steadiness of a man who had done this walk many thousands of times and had long since ceased to find it interesting or uninteresting. It was simply the walk, and he did it. He checked the panel readings outside each cell with a handheld terminal. He made notations. He moved on. He did not look at the detainees. Except that on the 3rd day, I am certain it was the 3rd day, because I was still counting everything with maximum precision, and the 3rd day was notable because it was the first day the second worker's footstep irregularity was consistent enough for me to be certain it was a genuine gate asymmetry rather than a floor surface variance. He paused outside cell 14. Not long. 3 seconds, perhaps 4. I was sitting against the back wall with my knees drawn up, and I looked at him, and he looked at the panel beside my door, and then he looked at me. Just briefly. The way a person looks at another person when they are not expecting to, and the habit of not looking has not quite taken hold yet. He moved on. I thought about that look for the rest of the day. There was not much else to think about, which is precisely why I cataloged it carefully, the way I would catalog an anomalous seismic reading that did not fit the expected pattern. Anomalies are information. You do not discard them because they are small. He was a human male. I had worked alongside humans on 3 survey postings. They were common in the outer compact, steady, methodical workers, most of them with a particular capacity for sustained attention in monotonous conditions. I had found across those 3 postings that the human workers I was assigned to generally had one quality in common. They paid attention to the work in front of them rather than the institutional hierarchy around it. It made them reliable partners in survey conditions, where the work itself is the thing that determines outcomes. The facility had 4 compact contracted maintenance workers. I could not see the others from cell 14, but I had mapped their patterns by sound. Oren Tail's pattern was distinctive. He was the slowest of the 4 and the most thorough. I could tell from the quality of the sounds his diagnostic case made against the panels that he was running full checks rather than abbreviated ones. The others finished the Block C corridor in between 9 and 13 minutes. He finished it in 19. The first time he left the water canister, I spent the next 4 hours constructing and discarding theories about why. He set it down outside my cell on the 7th day. Not during the food slot protocol. The food slot delivered a measured water allotment with each tray standard compact detention ration. The canister was additional. It was a standard compact tissue maintenance worker's personal canister, gray metal, battered at the base, with a small identifying mark scratched near the cap. He set it down, ran the panel check, and walked on without looking at me. The most obvious theory was error. He had set it down and forgotten it. I spent approximately 30 minutes on this theory before discarding it. A man who runs complete panel checks when everyone else runs abbreviated ones does not forget personal equipment in a corridor. The second theory was that it was a deliberate gesture, that he had carried a second canister on his maintenance round specifically for this purpose. This theory required that he had thought about cell 14 during the hours between his evening round and his morning round, which meant he had thought about the person in cell 14, which meant he had thought about me as a person who might benefit from more water, which meant he had understood me, across 6 days of passing 3 times daily, as a person. This was the theory the evidence supported. I stared at that canister for a long time. Water was not scarce in cell block C, the food slot rations were sufficient. The gesture was not about water. The gesture was about the thought behind it, about the fact of having been considered, at some point during the 14 hours I could not observe, by someone who was not required to consider me. In 41 days inside that facility, no one else did that. On the 14th day, he said my name. He was running the panel check outside my cell. I was sitting near the door. I had learned that the air near the door was marginally better than the air near the back wall, something to do with the circulation system's intake geometry, which I had modeled based on the directional quality of the air movement across several days. He was entering the panel readings into his terminal. And then, without looking up, he said quietly, "Keithai." Just that, my given name, not my registry number, detainee 14, which was the only designation anyone in the facility used for me. Keithai. I did not answer immediately. I was not certain, for one suspended moment, that I had heard correctly. The facility's ambient sound had a consistent white noise quality from the climate management system, and I had wondered on several occasions whether that sound, combined with 40 days of close listening, might eventually produce the auditory equivalent of misreading an instrument that has been calibrated too many times. But I had not misheard. He moved on. That night, or what I calculated was night, based on the dimming of the yellowed lights and the reduced corridor traffic, I sat with my back against the cell door and thought about how he knew my name. The intake documentation would have carried it. He had access to the facility's maintenance records, which were linked to the processing database, which contained the intake files. He had looked it up. He had read it from a screen somewhere in the facility's back systems, and he had remembered it, and he had said it out loud in a corridor where no one in the entire institutional structure was required to know it. I had been holding myself together with precision and counting, since the intake officer processed me in 40 minutes without meeting my eyes. Hearing my own name, spoken quietly in a detention facility corridor by a maintenance worker who was not required to know it, nearly undid me completely. I did not let it, but it was close, closer than I would like to admit, even now, even in retrospect, looking back from the other side of everything that followed. 3 weeks passed. I watched him with the careful attention I normally applied to seismic array calibration data methodically, without urgency, building a picture from accumulated small observations. He checked the panel outside cell 14 with the same thoroughness he applied to every cell. He left the water canister twice more. On the second occasion, there was a small packet of ground seed concentrate balanced on top of it, the kind that dissolves in hot water to make something close to a morning beverage. I had no means of heating water in the cell. I dissolved it cold and drank it slowly over 2 days because it was the only thing in the cell that was not the same as everything else in the cell. He began leaving 2 canisters after that, one at ambient temperature, one warm. I did not know how he managed the warm one. The logistics of it were not obvious. I found myself spending a significant portion of the 23rd day constructing a hypothesis. The most plausible answer involved the maintenance subcorridor behind cell block C, which, based on the sounds I had been mapping for 3 weeks, connected to a small service room adjacent to the facility's climate management unit. If the service room had a hot water reclamation tap, which most compact climate management installations of this generation did, and if a maintenance worker had occasion to pass through that sub-corridor during a normal round, and if a canister were placed at the tap during the outbound leg of the round and retrieved during the return leg, the temperature differential would be consistent with what I estimated the canister's temperature to be based on the speed at which my hands warmed when I held it. I was thinking about him the way I thought about survey formations, reading what the available evidence told me about the history of forces that had produced what I was looking at. The evidence said he was a careful man, thorough, a man who did his work completely and without requiring acknowledgement. It also said he had been inside this facility long enough to know its systems in detail, not just the standard maintenance protocols, but the deeper operational architecture, where the automated logs tracked and where they did not. The warm canister required him to be in the sub-corridor at a specific point in his route, at a specific time, in a way that was not recorded as anomalous. He had figured out how to do that. On the 31st day, the transfer order arrived. I knew about it before any official notification reached Cell 14. I had been listening to the facility's operational sounds for 31 days, and I knew what an administrative change felt like from inside the cell block. The corridor traffic that afternoon had a different quality. The intake officer's footsteps were sharper and quicker. The terminal update sounds more frequent. And there was a particular controlled quiet that falls over an institution when something significant has been decided and has not yet been communicated to everyone it affects. The notification came through the food slot with the evening tray. A printed form, compact administrative standard, dense text, formatted to convey maximum procedural weight in minimum space. Processing Station Rethkale. Transfer in 11 days. The form described it as a registry clarification facility. I had heard the name Rethkale twice in the outer survey postings, not from official sources, from other workers, in the way people mention places that carry a specific weight without being able to precisely articulate the weight source. What I knew, assembled from fragments across 12 years of survey postings, was that no detainee transferred to Processing Station Rethkale had ever returned to the compact framework with their registry intact. Some returned. But the registry, the credential record, the house affiliation, the survey certification, the legal standing was gone. Whatever Rethkale's processing involved, the outcome was permanent and it was not reversible. Without the registry, I would not legally exist as Velsorn Keithai, third-line heir of the Vrethkareth House, Grade 2 Survey Assessor. I would exist as whatever Rethkale's processing classified me to be, which, based on what I had been able to piece together about that facility, would be a number in a different kind of log. That evening, Orentale ran his panel check. He paused outside Cell 14 for slightly longer than usual. I was sitting near the door. In the dim yellow light, through the narrow mesh observation strip, I could see the part of his face that was visible at that angle. He was looking at the panel. His expression was the same as it always was, steady, composed, not indicating anything he did not choose to indicate. I pressed close to the mesh. "Orent." He did not startle. He kept his eyes on the panel. "The transfer form came," I said. "Rethkale, 11 days. He made a notation on his terminal. "Human," I said it carefully with the weight I needed it to carry. "Will you help me escape this place?" The corridor was quiet. The panel completed its cycle. He entered the notation, and then he looked at me, not the brief accidental look of the third day, but a full deliberate look through the mesh at my face. His eyes were dark and still. I looked back at him and did not look away because I had waited 31 days to ask someone this question, and there was no version of me that was going to look away from the answer. He did not answer. He finished the panel check, closed his terminal case and walked on. I heard his footsteps diminish. The corridor light hummed steadily. I sat against the door for a long time. I counted the ceiling tiles again, 48, the offset one in the northeast corner, the conduit junction that was not on the original schematics, the 11 yellowed light panels. I had told myself across 31 days that if the transfer order came, I would not lose the composure I had been building. I found in that particular silence that I had been partially right. I did not break. But the composure was thinner than I had believed it to be, and the thinness of it surprised me in the way that an instrument reading can surprise you. Not because the reading is impossible, but because you had built a model of the situation that your evidence did not actually support. The evidence, reviewed honestly, had always suggested the composure was thinner than I was representing it to myself. I had been in a compact detention facility for 31 days. The registry review had not been assigned. The transfer order was real. My certification, my house affiliation, my legal standing, Rethkale, was a mechanism for removing all of it, and the mechanism was efficient, and 11 days was a very specific and very short timeline. I sat against the door and breathed carefully, the way I breathe when I am processing data that I would prefer to discard but cannot justify discarding. 3 days passed. He ran his rounds. He left the canister. On the morning of the 34th day, he said my name in the corridor and did not say anything else. I said his name back, and he nodded once and kept walking. I stood at the mesh and watched him go down the corridor until the angle cut him from my sightline, and then I stood there a moment longer at the mesh, with the corridor empty in front of me and 8 days remaining before the transfer. On the 34th day, I noticed a change in his maintenance route. He was taking longer in the sub-corridor section. The evening round, which had been running at 26 minutes since I began tracking the modified timing 2 weeks prior, was now taking 31. The additional 5 minutes were not accounted for by any change in the panel check pattern. I could hear the checks running at their normal cadence. The time was being spent in the sub-corridor, and the sounds that came from that direction during those additional minutes had a quality I had been cataloging carefully for 3 days. They were not diagnostic sounds. He was not running equipment checks. The sounds had the specific, deliberate quality of a person practicing a sequence, running it through, pausing, returning to a specific point, running it through again. The particular character of someone committing a procedure to the kind of memory that operates below conscious recall. The same kind of memory that allows a survey assessor to run an array calibration sequence in unfavorable conditions without consulting the protocol sheet. On the 37th day, the sub-corridor sounds had a different quality, faster, smoother. The pauses were shorter and less frequent. He was past the memorization stage. He was running at speed. I understood then what he had not said. On the 40th day, he came through on his evening round. The corridor was at its quietest. I had observed over 6 weeks that the night staff at this hour was reduced to 3 workers, all posted at the main intake area on the far side of the facility. The transit between the intake area and cell block C was approximately 4 minutes at a normal pace. I had timed it from the sound patterns on 3 separate occasions. He ran the panel check outside cell 14. It took its normal time. He made his notation. He put his terminal away. Then he looked at me through the mesh, the deliberate look, not the accidental one, and said very quietly, 2 hours, leave everything. He walked on. I sat in the center of cell 14 and breathed, steadily and carefully, for a long time. I did an inventory of what I had accumulated across 40 days. The water canister with his scratch mark on it. The food allotment packaging I had folded into flat, useful sheets. I am not certain what I had intended to use them for. It was simply the habit of keeping potentially useful material. The survey certification card in the inner pocket of my field jacket, which the intake team had returned to me because it was a licensed compact document, and the facility's protocol did not allow confiscation of licensing credentials. I returned the certification card to the inner pocket. I left everything else. He had said leave everything. I thought for a significant time about the canister. I thought about setting it somewhere in the cell as a record, as evidence that something had happened in holding position 14 in cell block C that was not in the official logs. That someone had set a battered gray canister at the base of a cell door and set a name in an empty corridor. He had said leave everything. I left the canister at 400 by my internal count, which I had calibrated carefully across 40 days against the light cycle timings and the corridor traffic patterns, and which I trusted to within approximately 8 minutes. The cell door opened. Not the food slot, the door. He was standing in the corridor with his diagnostic case and a secondary pack that he had not been carrying before. The corridor was at its reduced night setting, the yellowed light dimmer than usual, the shadows in the wall alcoves deeper. He looked at me. I stepped out of cell 14 and stood in the corridor. The air was different. It was a small difference, one that would have been irrelevant to me 6 weeks earlier. But after 40 days of the cells filtered remnant air, the air that had already passed through 2 stages of the climate management system before it reached me, standing in the main corridor, with its direct connection to the facility's primary circulation, was significant. There was more of it, in some quality that I cannot precisely quantify. I stood still for several seconds and simply breathed. He said nothing, he moved. I followed him into the sub-corridor. I knew its geography by sound. I had been building the map for 23 days, but the visual reality was different from the auditory model in specific ways that I noted as we moved. The ceiling was lower than I had calculated, approximately 2 meters rather than 2.5. The conduit runs along the left wall were exposed and unlabeled, the insulation on several of them worn to a condition that would have generated a maintenance flag in a functional facility audit. The warmth from the climate management unit behind the right wall was more pronounced than the sound model had suggested. Oren moved through the corridor with the particular quality of a person whose feet know the route independently of their eyes, not quickly, but without any hesitation at all, not even the micro-hesitation that occurs when a person is navigating a familiar route in reduced visibility. He had run this route in complete darkness at some point during his practice sessions. The atmospheric lock was at the far end. Standard compact installation, Generation 4 facility design, 3-stage biometric administrative mechanical system. I had studied the class as part of the survey posting certification process. The atmospheric lock design appeared in the safety protocol module, and I had been thorough with that module, because atmospheric locks on survey installations can be the difference between losing an assessor and not losing one. The 3 stages, biometric authorization, administrative code entry, atmospheric equalization cycle. Biometric required a credentialed facility employee. Administrative code was 12 digits. Equalization was mechanical, 12 seconds. He opened the maintenance panel beside the lock. Inside the panel was not a standard diagnostic interface. He had done something to its internal configuration, carefully, methodically, with tools that a maintenance contractor would carry in a diagnostic case over the course of 5 weeks of regular facility access. The standard biometric reader had been bypassed through a secondary interface that he had constructed from components I did not fully recognize in the low light. The modification was not destructive. He had not damaged the panel. He had built a route around the stage he could not clear through normal means, a route that would, when he ran the sequence, tell the system that the biometric requirement had been satisfied by a credentialed user. He ran the sequence. I watched his hands throughout. They were steady, not the steadiness of a person suppressing a physical response, but the genuine stillness of a person for whom this particular action has been performed enough times that it is no longer generating a stress response. He had run this sequence until it was underneath his thinking, and now he ran it the way I run a sensor array calibration present, precise, and not alarmed. The first indicator went from red to green. Administrative code, 12 digits. He entered them from memory without pause between any of them. The cadence was even. I had been correct about the nature of the sub-corridor sounds over the previous week. Second indicator, green. The equalization cycle, 12 seconds. The sound of it in the enclosed corridor was the pressure equalization of a survey outpost airlock, which I had heard many times and associated with the beginning of work rather than with anything threatening. It was a mechanical breath, the system balancing itself. Then the lock disengaged. The service exit door opened. The air that came through it was cold and carried the outdoor quality I had not experienced in 41 days. We went through. The utility access path outside the service exit was narrow, running along the facility's outer wall. To the left, the main entrance approach lit. To the right, the path curved behind the secondary storage block toward the southeast corner of the perimeter. He turned right without hesitation. I stayed close behind him, close enough to hear his breathing, which was controlled and even. The breathing of a person managing something significant who has decided that steadiness is the correct tool. The southeast perimeter corner had a maintenance access gate. He used a bypass he had built, not the facility's standard key, which he would not have been issued, but a mechanical solution. It went in cleanly. The gate swung open in a single smooth arc. We walked through. The flatland beyond the perimeter was red dust and low scrub and the open sky, which was the dark before dawn, with stars visible at the horizon where the facility's exterior lights did not reach. The air was cold, genuinely cold. The kind of cold that exists outside institutional climate management, the kind that presses against exposed skin and says, "You are outside." I stopped walking for a moment. He stopped too. He scanned the horizon with the professional habit of a person who checks their environment automatically. Satisfied, or at least not alarmed by what he did not see, he looked at me. We were 40 meters from the perimeter fence. In the pre-dawn dark, the facility's exterior lighting left us in dimness. His face, without the mesh between us and without the yellow light behind it, was different from the face I had been reading for 40 days. He looked tired. Not the exhaustion of one night, the deep accumulation of a man who has been carrying something for a long time and has just set it down. And alongside the tiredness, something else. A particular quality in a face that has made a decision it believed in and has come out the other side of it, and is only now determining what the cost was. The cost was real. I had thought about this carefully over the last several days in the way I think about things I cannot change, with precision rather than avoidance. He had lost his contract. 14 years of facility maintenance work was gone, and whatever standing he had in the compact's contractor registry was gone with it. The facility's systems would show the modified panel, the cleared atmospheric lock, the missing detainee. The investigation would be thorough. He would not be able to return to compact detention facility work, and the investigation's conclusion would make aspects of outer compact contracting difficult as well, at least initially. He had done this for a detainee in cell block C, holding position 14, whose house name he had looked up in a processing database, whose face he had looked at through a mesh observation strip, and who had asked him a question in a corridor and looked at him without looking away. I looked at him and found that I had words. I had not been certain I would. I had thought, in the cell, that if this moment came the feeling would be too large for language, or that I would be too overwhelmed by the cold air and the open sky to arrange anything coherently. I was wrong. The words were very clear. I said them in Vreth Karath first. The old form, the form my grandmother used for formal occasions, and for the things that needed to be said correctly. The form that is not casual, that carries weight in the way a survey notation carries weight, precisely because it is not said unless it is true. And then I said them in compact standard, so he could fully hold them. "I'll stay by your side forever." He looked at me for a long moment. The stars were still visible at the horizon. The facility behind us was quiet. We had perhaps 2 hours before the morning staff change, perhaps less, and we needed to be significantly further from the perimeter before that. He knew this. I knew it. "We should move," he said quietly. "Yes," I said. We moved. He had a direction, northwest, toward the Threscale transport corridor. He knew the route, which meant he had studied the area's transit geography during the same period. He was building the panel interface and memorizing the administrative code. The secondary pack he carried had documentation inside it. Not false documents, which would have been more dangerous if inspected, but correctly filed transit forms for a compact maintenance contractor between postings, and a set of survey certification forms, blank, that could be completed with legitimate information. My certification card was in my inner pocket, Grade 2, seismic and atmospheric, issued and registered through the Compact Survey Authority, legitimate. We moved. He had a direction, northwest, toward the Threscale transport corridor. He knew the route, which meant he had studied the area's transit geography during the same period. He was building the panel interface and memorizing the administrative code. The secondary pack he carried had documentation inside it. Not false documents, which would have been more dangerous if inspected, but correctly filed transit forms for a compact maintenance contractor between postings, and a set of survey certification forms, blank, that could be completed with legitimate information. My certification card was in my inner pocket, Grade 2, seismic and atmospheric, issued and registered through the Compact Survey Authority, legitimate. Whatever Kethorval 7's processing had been intended to result in, the intake protocol had returned my credentials because the intake officer's forms required it, and the intake officer had followed the forms, and the forms had been followed by someone who did not yet know that I was meant to end up at Rethkale with no credentials at all. It was the only gap in an otherwise complete institutional mechanism, and my certification card was in it. We walked. The flatland was not technically difficult terrain. Flat, consistent substrate, low scrub at regular intervals, no significant obstacles or elevation changes. It was the kind of surface I read automatically and involuntarily. The composition, the wear patterns on the scrub, what the distribution of vegetation indicated about subsurface moisture retention and wind patterns. The scrub was evenly distributed, which indicated consistent atmospheric moisture across the zone, which was consistent with proximity to the Threscale transport corridor's established weather influence. I estimated the corridor at between 35 and 50 kilometers. The cold eased as we moved. Not because it was warming, the temperature was still below the level I would have chosen, but because movement generates its own response, and I had not been able to move freely in 41 days. After 20 minutes of walking, I had stopped noticing the cold and had begun simply noticing the flatland, and the sky above it, and the way the pre-dawn dark was differentiating at the horizon into identifiable color bands. Dark blue above, darker gray at the horizon. The red dust beneath us catching almost nothing from the sky yet, just existing as a consistent surface that I could read the composition of by feel through the soles of my survey boots. At some point, perhaps 2 hours into the walk, with the sky beginning to lighten in earnest at the east, I said, "You said my name on the 14th day." He glanced at me. I did. "You looked it up in the intake records?" "Yes." "Why?" I asked. I had been curious about this for 27 days. He was quiet in the way he was quiet when he was thinking rather than when he had nothing to say. I had learned the difference across 40 days. "You were counting things," he said. "The ceiling tiles, the light cycles, the seconds between the food slot and the footsteps. I could see you doing it through the mesh." I considered that. "Most people in Block C stop counting by the end of the first week," he said. "They get tired of it or they just stop. You were still doing it at 2 weeks. You were working very hard to stay present. He paused. I thought someone should know your name. I looked at the horizon. The light was coming now, the pale first differentiation between sky and land that happens on flat terrain without the visual interest of elevation change. It was quiet. A different category of quiet from the facility's quiet, which had the constant underpresence of the climate management system. This quiet was complete. You could have left it, I said. When I asked you, you could have finished the round and said nothing and filed the transfer documentation with the evening report. Yes, he said. Why didn't you? The considered quiet. Then, because you looked at me and didn't look away, and that takes something in that place. Doing that takes something I don't have a specific word for. We walked. The Threscale Transport Corridor was 38 kilometers from the facility perimeter. I confirmed this when we reached the first survey marker at the transit zone boundary, standard compact installation, distance notation in 4 languages, the maintenance date stamped 3 years prior and overdue for servicing. I had estimated between 40 and 60, the shorter end of my range. We reached the way station as the morning arrived fully, the sun clear above the flatland, the exterior temperature rising enough that the cold stopped pressing against exposed skin. The way station was small, unmanned, a documentation terminal, a covered waiting area, an equipment storage unit. He filed the transit documentation at the terminal. I watched the flatland to the southeast and saw nothing moving. The facility was below the horizon line. The sky above it was clean. He came and sat across from me. There was an equipment case between us. He set a packet of ground seed concentrate on it and a warm canister. I looked at the canister. Then I looked at him. He was watching me with the expression I had been reading through mesh for 40 days, still, steady, at rest with something. Without the mesh and the yellow light of cell block C, I could see it clearly for the first time. It was the expression of a person who has made a decision they believed in fully and is now simply present in what has come after the decision. Not waiting, not calculating, just present. I made the beverage. It tasted significantly better warm. The transit documentation holds for 10 days, he said. After that, we need an extension through the outer survey framework. There's a posting at Threscale Station, Mineral Survey, Grade 2 certification, 8-month contract. He looked at me with a deliberate look. Your certification covers the specialization. Seismic and atmospheric, I said. Yes. I know a contractor at the station, he said. Former posting. He owes me a reasonable favor. I considered this, and after the 8 months. Survey postings run on contract cycles, he said. 8 months, then review, then extension or new contract. There's always work on the outer compact margin for Grade 2 certification. The survey framework is understaffed at the extension-capable level. Most assessors with your specialization move into senior roles before year 5. You've got 12 years. There's room. And for you, I said. The facility contract is gone. Maintenance work is available on the transit stations, he said. The outer compact stations are chronically underpaired on facilities maintenance. No detention registry, no clearance requirement. Standard contractor status. He paused. I've had 14 years of experience in a high-security facility. That covers most of what a transit station would need. I held the warm canister between both hands. The ground seed concentrate was still in it, and its warmth was working its way through my palms and up toward my wrists in the gradual, spreading way that warmth works when you have been genuinely cold. The flatland around the way station extended without walls in every direction, and the morning was fully arrived now, the sun above the flatland horizon, the dust beginning to show its actual color rather than the gray of pre-dawn. Oren, I said. He looked at me. I said I would stay by your side forever, I said. I meant it. In Vreth Kareth, the permanent vowel form is not used casually. My grandmother would have something specific to say about the occasion on which I chose to use it. Something shifted in his expression. Not large, he was not a man who made large expressions, and I had 40 days of evidence to calibrate against. But something shifted, and I had been reading his face carefully enough by now that I caught it clearly. A kind of arrival. As if the sentence had landed in him, the way a survey reading lands when the data finally resolves into a comprehensible model. What would she say? That I was being precise, I said. She was a survey assessor also. Grade 3, structural geology specialization, 31 years on outer compact postings. She believed in precision above almost everything else, and she did not use permanent form language for things she had not thoroughly examined. She would say that 41 days of careful observation constituted adequate examination. She would probably also say that the subcorridor panel bypass was a grade 4 structural modification, and she was impressed. And then she would ask whether the bypass had been documented in case it needed to be replicated. He was quiet for a moment, and then something else shifted in his expression. The faint, controlled thing that was, I had determined, his version of what other people produced more visibly. She sounds like someone I'd have liked. She was, I said. She would have liked you. I paused. She had very specific opinions about people who did what they said they would do. You were consistent for 40 days in conditions where no one was looking, and there was no institutional incentive to be. She considered that the most reliable available measure. She would have been watching the panel checks, he said, from inside the cell. Yes, I said, she absolutely would have. He was quiet for another moment. Then he said quietly, "That's a long time, what you said." Yes, I said, it is. I said it correctly. The transport vehicle was close enough to flag. He would know the way station protocol, the manual flag mechanism for transit pickup, old generation compact installation, unchanged from the original construction. He knew every procedure he had ever needed to know. He had also, in the past 9 days, built several procedures that no compact document had ever covered, from components that were available to him and time that he had found inside a route that no one was monitoring carefully enough. I looked at him across the flat surface of the equipment case, with the open sky above us and no walls between us for the first time. What I felt was not simply relief, though relief was present. What I felt, primarily, was the specific quality of recognition that comes after you have been watching something carefully for a very long time, and the data finally resolves into the only conclusion it was ever pointing at. The moment a seismic model stops being ambiguous and shows you the actual structure of what is beneath the surface. All 40 days of small evidence, assembling into the only conclusion they supported. He had begun to choose on the 3rd day when he looked at me through the mesh, and it was not accidental. He had chosen completely on the 31st, when I looked at him and did not look away, and he had understood what that cost and had decided it mattered. He had spent 9 more days turning the choice into something that would function in the real world, something with a bypass interface and a memorized code sequence, and a mechanical gate tool and transit documentation, and a contractor at Threshoveth Station who owed him a reasonable favor. He had done the work, that was the thing. He had not simply decided. He had done the work that the decision required. I was Velsorn Keithai, 3rd-line heir of the Vrethkareth House, Grade 2 survey assessor, seismic and atmospheric specialization. I had been in compact detention processing Hub Kethorval 7 for 41 days. I had counted 48 ceiling tiles, 11 light panels, 1 offset tile in the northeast corner, 1 conduit junction not on the original schematics, and the footstep intervals of every worker who passed cell 14. I had counted the days since a maintenance contractor had set a battered gray canister at the base of my door and said my name on the 14th morning. 41 days. It was, I thought, a reasonable amount of time to be certain. He stood and picked up his pack. He looked at the transport vehicle. He looked at me. Ready. I stood. The survey certification card was in my inner pocket. The flatland extended to every horizon without walls. The sky above Threscale was the specific clear quality it had after dawn on a low-humidity morning, the kind my instruments would have quantified precisely, and my grandmother would have simply called good. "Yes," I said. He raised his hand to flag the transport. We went.